All right, everyone, get ready. We're diving deep into the world of research methods in psychology today. We're cracking open Research Methods in Psychology, evaluating a world of information. It's by Beth Morling, second edition, by the way. And let me tell you, this book is like the ultimate guide to understanding all those psychology studies and headlines we see everywhere.
You're not wrong. And this isn't just for, academics. This is about giving you the power to decode those research findings you see every day, whether it's in the news or even just like a casual conversation.
Totally. And Morling starts off with this framework. It's so helpful. She calls it the three claims, four validities. Imagine this. Every research finding is basically trying to tell you a story, right?
Hey, I like that.
So the three claims are kind of like different types of stories, and then the four validities are tools to figure out how believable each story actually is.
It's like a lie detector test for research. I'm into it.
Exactly. So let's break it down. First up, the three claims. Frequency association and causal. Take this headline. More than 4 in 10 teens admit to texting while driving. That's a frequency claim straight up telling us how often something happens.
Makes sense. Then you've got association claims, right? They're hinting at a link between two things, like couples who meet online are more likely to have happy marriages. It's suggesting there might be a connection, but doesn't say one thing causes the other.
Right. And then there's the bold one, the causal claim. This is like making a direct link saying one thing causes another, like music lessons enhance IQ. That's a big claim.
Okay, so that's where those four validities come in, right? They're like our BS detectors.
Exactly. They are construct validity, external validity, statistical validity, and internal validity. Think of it like this. Construct validity is making sure they're actually measuring what they're trying to measure.
Mhm.
It's like if you want to measure happiness, are you really capturing all the nuances of happiness, or are you just like measuring how often someone smiles?
I get it. And then there's external validity, right? That's all about, like, can we trust that these findings would apply to other people, not just the people they studied?
Exactly. If a study's only done on, say, college students, can we really say the same thing applies to people in their 50s? Maybe, maybe not. Then there's statistical validity, and this is where we look at the numbers. Is the effect they found actually meaningful? Or could it just be a fluke?
Okay, so it's making sure the math checks out. And last but not least, we've got internal validity. This one's huge, especially for those causal claims. This is all about being really sure that it's actually the thing they're saying is causing the effect and not some other hidden factor.
This is super important because think about it. We see claims like this every day, everywhere. It's easy to just accept the catchy headline. But if we use this framework, we can start asking the right questions. How did they measure that? Who did they study? Could something else be going on here?
It's about thinking critically and not just, blindly believing everything you see.
Totally. Now, let's talk about why relying just on personal experience can sometimes lead us down some interesting paths. Moreland gives this great example in the book. Bloodletting, remember that. People were convinced it worked for centuries.
Oh yeah, the good old, let's drain some blood and see if you feel better approach.
Right. And this is where those pesky confounds come in. Confounds are those sneaky factors that can mess up the results and make us think there's a link when there isn't.
Like, imagine you have a cold and you swear by this certain herbal tea. You drink it, and like a week later, you feel amazing. Must be the tea, right?
That's what our brains want to tell us. But hold on. Could it be something else? Maybe your body naturally fought off the cold. Maybe you were sleeping better. Without comparing it to a group of people who didn't drink the magic tea, it's tough to say for sure.
And that is exactly why we need research,
Mm.
to help us untangle all those possibilities, control for the confounds, and see what's actually going on.
It's like the difference between looking at one puzzle piece versus seeing the whole picture.
Morling talks about this other famous example, the Mozart effect. Remember that one? The idea that listening to Mozart makes you smarter.
Oh yeah, everyone was buying Mozart for their babies.
Right. And while the original research did show this tiny, temporary boost in one specific type of spatial reasoning after listening to Mozart, the media kind of ran with it.
It's like a game of telephone. The message can get a little distorted along the way.
Exactly. Which is why it's so important to be careful about believing any scientific claim, especially those that seem too good or too bad to be true.
Totally. So how do we make sure we're not getting fooled? Let's talk about the scientific approach. That systematic way of figuring things out that sets research apart from those captivating but sometimes misleading anecdotes. Morling uses this thing called the theory data cycle to show how science actually works.
It's like this constant back and forth between scientists testing out their ideas and then refining them based on the evidence.
Exactly. And it all starts with a theory, which is basically a broad explanation for something that's supported by a bunch of evidence.
But here's the thing. A scientific theory isn't just some random guess, right? It's got to be testable. There's got to be some way to potentially prove it wrong, otherwise it's not really science.
Right. And from that theory comes a hypothesis that's a testable prediction. Morling uses that fascinating study by Harlow with the monkeys to show this. Remember that one?
Oh yeah, the one with the baby monkeys and the surrogate mothers.
Exactly. Harlow wanted to understand what drives babies to form those strong bonds with their caregivers.
Back then, everyone thought it was mainly about food, like whoever feeds you, you get attached to.
But Harlow had this different idea. He thought that physical touch and comfort from a caregiver, what he called contact comfort, might actually be more important than food for developing that attachment.
It's like that feeling of being held and comforted so important, right?
Exactly. So, to test his theory, he set up this clever experiment with baby monkeys. He created two moms for them, one made of wire that had a bottle for feeding, and one covered in soft terry cloth, but no bottle.
So one mom provided food but not comfort, and the other one comfort but no food.
Exactly. His prediction was that if contact comfort was more important, the baby monkeys would spend more time clinging to the cloth mom, even though she didn't have the food.
And what happened?
Well, that's exactly what happened. The baby monkeys spent way more time cuddling up to the cloth mom, even though she wasn't feeding them.
That's fascinating. It really highlights how important that feeling of comfort and security is for those little guys.
Totally. And it shows how data, the results of the experiment can support a theory. But here's the thing about scientific theories, and this is important. They're never truly proven.
That's right. Science isn't about finding some ultimate truth. It's about getting closer and closer to understanding how things work.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that theory data cycle.
Yeah.
Based on the results of a study, researchers might refine their theory or even chuck it out altogether if the data doesn't support it.
It's like a constant process of questioning and refining our understanding based on the evidence.
Exactly. Speaking of evidence, let's talk about those different sources of information we encounter about psychological science. Morling gives this super helpful hierarchy of credibility with journal articles at the top and, well, let's just say less rigorous sources at the bottom.
It's like a food pyramid for
Sure.
information. We want to make sure we're getting our information from the most nutritious sources.
Totally. And at the top, you've got journal articles. They're considered the gold standard because they go through this rigorous process called peer review.
It's like a quality control system for research. Experts in the field go through this study with a fine-tooth comb to make sure the methods are sound and the conclusions are legit.
It's a tough process to get through, which is a good thing. It helps weed out the iffy studies and ensures that only high-quality research makes it into those journals.
Exactly. But they can be a bit dense to read sometimes.
For sure. Edited books are another great source, though. They're collections of chapters, usually written by different experts on a particular topic.
So you get a range of perspectives. And then there are full-length books, but you got to be a bit more careful with those, right?
Right, you have to consider who wrote it, what their expertise is, and whether it's based on actual evidence or more just their opinions.
Makes sense. And then you've got those trade books, the ones you see in like any bookstore. They can be a good intro to a topic, but...
But they're not always written by experts or based on the latest research.
And then there are wikis.
Oh man, wikis. Love them and hate them. Super helpful for getting a quick overview of something, but...
But anyone can edit them, so you never know if the information is totally accurate.
Exactly. And finally, we have the popular press, our news websites, magazines, all that.
They can be great for getting research out there to the public,
But they also tend to sensationalize findings or even misinterpret the research altogether. Remember all those headlines about how chocolate cures cancer?
yeah, not quite.
Oh.
So always take those popular press reports with a grain of salt.
Big time. Now let's talk about a really crucial step in the research process. Turning those big, often kind of fuzzy psychological concepts into something we can actually measure. Morling calls this operationalization, and it's a lot trickier than it sounds.
It really is. It's like, how do you measure something like love? Do you measure heart rate? Or how often someone says, I love you?
Right. It makes you realize that even how we understand the world depends on how we choose to measure things.
Totally. Morling gives a few cool examples of how researchers have operationalized the concept of subjective well-being. It's basically how satisfied people are with their lives.
One way is to use this thing called Ed Diener's 5-item scale. It's a questionnaire where people rate how much they agree with statements like, in most ways, my life is close to my ideal.
It's simple,
Hmm.
but it's been shown to be pretty reliable and valid, meaning it measures what it's supposed to measure and does so consistently.
There's also the ladder of life. Ever heard of that one?
Oh yeah, I like that one. It's so clever. People imagine a ladder where the bottom rung is the worst possible life and the top rung is the best possible life. Then they just indicate where they feel they are on the ladder at that moment.
It's so simple, yet it captures so much.
Right. It's amazing how creative researchers have to be to make these abstract ideas measurable. But that's what makes it possible to study them in the first place.
Welcome back to our deep dive into research methods. Last time, we talked about those 3 claims, 4 validities, remember, our decoder ring for understanding research findings.
And all those sneaky confounds that can mess things up. Like Morling uses that example of bloodletting. Just because 2 things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other.
Exactly. It's like that saying correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because people with umbrellas are more likely to get wet doesn't mean umbrellas cause rain, right?
Exactly. There's something else going on there, the weather.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of different kinds of research, we touched on those different sources of information last time. Morling gives that hierarchy with journal articles at the top.
It's like climbing a mountain of trustworthiness.
Yeah.
Right. Each source is a different level.
Exactly. Journal articles are the summit they've been through, the toughest evaluation, peer review, where other experts pick them apart before they can be published.
Like a super tough job interview, but for research papers.
Right. Only the best get through. So journal articles, that's where you go for the most reliable info. But they can be tough to read sometimes. All that jargon.
I know. So what about edited books or even full-length books?
Edited books are cool because you get different experts' views on the same topic.
So it's a broader perspective.
Exactly. Full-length books can be great for going deep on something, but
But like you said before, gotta consider who wrote it. Are they an expert? Is it based on evidence or just their ideas?
exactly. Then there are those trade books, the kind you find at the bookstore.
Right. They can be a good intro to a topic, but
But they might not always be super up-to-date on the latest research.
gotcha. And then wikis.
Ah, yes, wikis.
Mm?
So helpful, but
Mm.
anyone can edit them.
So double check that info.
Exactly. And last but not least, popular press news, magazines, all that.
They have a huge influence, but also can be a source of misinformation sometimes.
It's true. It's all about grabbing your attention, telling a good story, which sometimes means.
Sometimes the accuracy takes a hit.
Yeah. Chocolate cures cancer. Not so fast.
Right. So always be careful with popular press stuff. Go back to the source if you can.
Exactly. That journal article.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about how researchers take these big, often kind of fuzzy psychological concepts and turn them into something measurable.
Ah, yes. Operationalization.
Ah,
One of the trickiest parts, but it's so essential.
it's like, how do you measure love? Do you measure heart rate or how often someone says, I love you?
Exactly. It makes you realize how much our understanding of the world depends on how we measure things.
Morling gives these cool examples of how they've operationalized subjective well-being, which is basically how satisfied are you with your life?
Right. And one common way is using Ed Diener's 5-item scale. It's a questionnaire. People rate their agreement with statements like, in most ways, my life is close to my ideal.
It seems so simple, but
But it's been shown to work. Reliable and valid.
there's also the ladder of life. Have you heard of that one?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. So clever.
It is. People imagine a ladder. The bottom is the worst possible life. The top is the best.
Yeah.
And you just say where you are on that ladder right now.
It's elegant.
It really is. Shows how creative researchers have to be to measure these complex things. But they have to, otherwise we can't study them.
Exactly. Measurement is the key.
It's like they say, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You don't want to judge based on just one study. Got to look at the whole picture, right?
Exactly. And remember, research is a journey, not a destination.
Oh, I like that.
It's not about finding some perfect truth. It's about constantly learning, updating what we know.
Right. Always more to discover, which I guess is what makes it exciting. So let's bring it back to those 3 claims and how we can use the 4 validities to really put those claims to the test.
Love it. It's like we have this toolkit now for evaluating research.
Totally. Okay, let's say we see a headline that goes, people who meditate daily are happier. First, what kind of claim is that? And then how do we use our four validities checklist?
That's a causal claim, right? Saying
Yeah.
meditation makes you happier.
Right. So which validity do we check first?
Got to start with construct validity. How did they actually measure happiness in this study? Was it a good measure, one that's been used before and shown to work? Or did they just make something up?
Right, because happiness can mean different things to different people.
Exactly. Then, external validity. Who did they study? Can we generalize from their group to everyone?
Like, if it's only a study on monks who've meditated for decades, that might not apply to me.
Exactly. And because it's a causal claim, we really got to scrutinize that internal validity.
Right. Did they do an experiment? Was it well designed? Could there be other reasons those meditators were happier? Maybe they also eat super healthy or something?
All good questions. And this is key. One study isn't proof. We want to look for the same results across many studies before we get too excited.
Makes sense. Okay, what about a frequency claim? Like, over 70% of people experience imposter syndrome. What's most important there?
Frequency claims, it's all about construct validity and external validity.
Right. So with imposter syndrome, did they measure it in a way that makes sense? And can we trust that 70% number applies broadly?
Exactly. Maybe they only surveyed CEOs or something. That doesn't mean everyone feels that way.
Okay, last one. Association claims, like living closer to green spaces is linked to better heart health.
Okay, for those, got to look at statistical validity and, as always, external validity.
Right. So for statistical validity, how strong is that link? Is it a big effect or a tiny one that might not mean much?
Exactly. And external, same idea. Maybe this only applies to cities, not rural areas. Lots to consider.
This is great. We've got this whole system now for breaking down research.
It's like having X-ray vision for research.
I love it. We're not just passively accepting whatever we read now.
Right. You're asking the right questions, challenging those assumptions.
Thinking critically. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so cool. It's not just about, memorizing facts. It's about having this whole new way to think about the information we see in the world.
Exactly. Becoming better consumers of information, making smarter decisions.
Yes, based on evidence.
Exactly.
This has been fantastic. So everyone listening, remember, research is a journey. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and who knows what you'll discover.